Yeah, hello there. Today I'm in Dorking, a little market town about 20 miles, 30 odd kilometres south of London itself. Charming little place, got some nice little back streets, had a little stroll around the town looking for something to draw. Lots of nice little corners, but I hadn't brought a chair with me. So, as is always the way, you go looking towards the high street and you go looking for a cafe. And I was lucky enough to find a little courtyard, the Old King's Head courtyard, the Old King's Head being a pub. But in the back of this courtyard is actually some little cafes, some nice healthy little food cafes. And it has a charming little flavour to it, this space. And once lunch was had, I thought it would be ideal to do a little sketch. Nothing aids digestion more than a sketch. I say that semi-jokingly, but actually it's really nice just to sit and digest. You've had a meal and then you have a drawing. There's something very, civilized about it. Now the space is relatively complex. There's lots of little returns and rebates and lintels and textures and different kinds of stone and weatherboarding, timber boarding. So I really wanted to kind of capture that well. So I thought I'd go about it in the way of just putting down some guidelines first. I didn't want to embarrass myself by getting it wrong. And now I'm going to try a new pen. I've had this pen for a little while, but it's been misbehaving. So I've been finding kind of ways of integrating it into my process. It's a Tom Studio pen. Tom Studio is an interesting little fountain pen company in the UK that makes aluminium pens, the bodies, with lots of interesting little nibs. And this is a flexi nib. It's kind of one of those nibs that everybody who's an urban sketcher is kind of longing for. And this is one of the very, very few fountain pens I've ever seen with one of this sort. It's a really flexible nib. The kind of nib that, unless you're experienced with a fountain pen, you really should stay a little bit clear of. The difference in a fountain pen nib and an ordinary kind of biro, as it were, is that a fountain pen nib can only really be used in limited directions. You can basically draw in lines. You can't kind of scribble with a fountain pen nib. And a flexible nib like this, even more so. It literally has one direction it's happy going. So you have to be extremely controlled with the direction of the pen. I mean, you couldn't use a nib like this, for example, to sign your name. It simply wouldn't do it. It wouldn't move in that way. So you have to be sort of super attuned to what it will do and what it won't do. So you'd ask yourself, well, why do you want that pen then? What's the benefit of it? The benefit is line variation. It's a pen that can go everything from a very thin hair line sort of thickness all the way up to sort of 1.5 mm, 2 millimeters wide, and it has a real living quality to it, that line. Now, I like a very wet nib, and I've tried to barrel fill, eyedropper fill these pens, and they don't like it. I can't seem to get them to play fair with me. They kind of leak too much, partly probably because I run around so much they're kind of shaken in my bag. So I'm actually doing an interesting little kind of mix up with this pen. It is preloaded with a cartridge of black ink, but I'm also dipping it into blue ink. Now the madness of this is to get that kind of color change between blue and black, and also to make the nib incredibly wet, so it really does kind of give ink in a very kind of fluid way. So it just doesn't dry. At least that's the game. That's what I'm aiming for. I like a flexible nib, and a flexible nib deposits a lot of ink, and therefore the problem is it drying out and it not being able to drop that ink anymore. So by dipping it into a little bottle of ink, then I negate that problem. I get past that problem. So once I've got myself this very characterful, kind of old-fashioned, in a cool way, sort of ink line, and to be honest, I think I'm going to do a drawing like this again, because I quite like this stage, and it's asking for watercolor this, and I didn't give it watercolor. I went acrylic, and I really went too far with this one. But I think there's mileage yet in this kind of flexible nib width kind of line. I think I like it. I like it as it is now. Anyway, I digress. Once I've got to this point, I'm going in with the acrylic sky, because again, for me, when you put it in the sky, the drawing immediately feels kind of well on the way to being good. There's something so happy about putting a blue sky that it really lifts the whole drawing up. And there are times when I wish I could have the courage to do black line, blue sky, no more than that. I always go farther because I think that's really the essence of the sketch, is to explore how far you could go or how far you shouldn't have gone. Where to stop is a less interesting question to me, other than when I have to leave. You know, I'm quite happy to draw until it's time to go, rather than draw until I think the drawing's finished. Just want to highlight the Arrtx pen. I've had this pen for a long time, and I bought a little set, and they've been super reliable. They don't get a lot of shout outs by me, but I've realized that I always have them in my pen box. They're necessary. Things like the Arrtx, I used to call them Arrtx. I've been told they're called Arrtx Acrylic Pens. They were really my first pens, and they're still in my box, and they're still super reliable. Ultimately, I think knowing your kind of the pens you're going to be friends with, I think that's a huge part of a happy day out, you know, knowing which pen is going to give you joy, and not being afraid to explore and experiment with surprises. It's that mix of the reliable set and never being afraid to add something new, because new gives you a fresh view, a fresh ability. This is the Tombow. Tombow is one of those pens that every urban sketcher has, really, but you don't need many. I mean, they are an expensive pen considering what they are, but they lay down such a lovely translucent colour. They're just wonderful for shadows. So I've always got one or two in my bag, and they always provide a kind of reliable subtlety to a drawing. I'm also using this, which is a new Arrtx pen. No, Arrtx pen. Got to remember to say it proper. Which has got a brush pen, but just black. It's nothing particularly special, but it's got quite a nice feel to it. It's one of those you can throw it in the bag and it's going to give you a black line in an acrylic brushy way that could end up being a staple for me, could end up being the one I just carry forever. It's super cheap, it feels very reliable, the kind of brush itself has a bit of character to it, and you can see that you can have the ability to kind of create very thick and relatively thin lines quite happily in a way that feels very forgiving. So you mix this kind of black line with the fountain pen line, and I think they really complement each other. They really seem to work at sort of two ends of the same spectrum, that sense of the fluidity and the variation of the line. And I don't know, it's happy days. Now, I've used the Just Art acrylic pens before, but they are still new to me, and I've only got a handful in the bag here. They have a slightly different kind of nib, slightly more foamy, a bit softer, quite interesting. I'm still coming to terms with them. I do find their colours are good, and they give good sort of ink. You know, they kind of are quite wet. I'm still working out whether that nib is something I have control of. Now, another thing worth highlighting whenever it happens is the turning of the board. One of the advantages of having loose A3 paper in a clipboard like this, as opposed to having a big sketchbook, is the immediacy and easiness with which you can spin that paper around. Because there are times when your hand wants to move in a certain direction. If you're doing lines, if you're doing bricks, you don't want to kind of have to cramp and sort of force your hand into a strange shape purely for the, you know, for the uprightness of the image. Typically, I think people would edit that kind of moment out of footage like this, but I think it's important for you to see the reality of it, really, that of course you flip the board around, because sometimes the hand wants to move in certain ways, in the same way as nibs want to work in certain ways. If there's one thing I'd like to convince the world of, it's to leave the sketchbook at home. In fact, never buy a sketchbook. Sketchbooks for me are super controlling. They are always the same kind of paper, the same colour, and always the same size, and they're page after page just waiting for you to fill them up. It feels machine-like. It completely turns me off, a sketchbook. But tear pages out of that sketchbook and put it in a folio like this, mix it up with some other colours, now we're talking. Now we've got choice. It becomes a creative decision. It's not just I have to do another page in my sketchbook. It's liberating. That's what I'd like. I'd like to liberate the world from the tyranny of the sketchbook. Let's all just buy loose sheets from now on, shall we? Now, I often find that my drawings reach a kind of Y in the road, so 2 directions I can go. And I'll often go a direction and kind of wonder what the other direction would have ended up feeling like. So I turn left and I kind of wonder whether right was the better decision. And at this moment, my left turn is this 15mm black pen. It's super intense. It was quite a subtle drawing. It started out in a lovely, delicate way, and the more I've added, the more kind of crude it's got, and the black is kind of pushing that way over the edge. And of course, as soon as you start with the black, you have to kind of lean into it. You can't hold back because you have to balance the drawing. If you just put a little bit of this in, it's going to create this imbalance. This kind of left-hand side is going to look completely wrong. So I've got to go through the whole of the drawing and just boost some of those black lines up so they can fight off the influence of that left-hand side. And eventually, by the end of the drawing, I have to go into that black area and lighten it by putting some white lines in to show cobbles and bricks, just because I never quite feel at home with the amount of black. I think it's worth at some point, all of us, me especially, just doing some really restricted drawing styles, just to kind of break a rhythm. If I was to do a sketch only using the black pen, perhaps, or only using blues, or something that just stops you being quite so playful when it comes to the drawing like this. It's important to learn, and every drawing is a reason to learn, of course, but I do reach a point where I think to myself often, that would have been better with a little less courage in it, if that makes sense. That would have been better if I just held back. I tend to push drawings to the point where they break, and that's becoming as much a style as it is a process of learning and discovery. So it's not something I'm 100% comfortable with, but I will live and learn. That's what sketchers do. Every day we sketch, at least, is a day we learn. Talking of learning, doing a little thing here, a nice little trick. These are white boards, and I'm giving them the sky colour, or at least a reflection of sky colour. If you were to take a photograph of this view, put it into Photoshop and use that kind of eye detection tool to work out what colours are in there, you would find blue in the whites, simply because it's reflecting the sky. And it's a nice thing to be able to bring some of that into the actual drawing, not only on the white surfaces but also on some of the brickwork. It really connects the sky colour in towards the general textural colour. Now, once I've actually finished the drawing, later on that day, hence this different footage, I do go in there and add a whole load of cobbles and bricks, simply because it just felt too stark, too extreme. And I think it works. I think in hindsight, I would now be able to incorporate this same process more naturally into the drawing, rather than have to kind of tag it on at the end. So here we are at the end of the drawing. I had fun. It was a pleasant day. It was a pleasant lunch, a nice cup of coffee. The drawing went a bit too far, but I know that, and that's important. I've learned where to pull back. If only I could listen to myself. So anyway, thank you for staying to the end. Go out there and buy a few loose sheets. Chuck them in a portfolio. You'll have fun.